The day I asked for a divorce, I slapped the evidence of my husband's 10-year affair with his business partner on the table. Evan stared at the file, his face a mask of shock. So you knew? 10 years ago, you already knew about Zoe and me? Yes. A long silence stretched between us. The afternoon light filtered through the Venetian blinds, casting tiger stripes across the mahogany table where we'd shared countless family dinners. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if the weight of a decade's worth of secrets had finally materialized into something tangible. Then, why now? He finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why wait until now to divorce me? I studied his face, the face I'd once loved, the face that had smiled at me on our wedding day 20 years ago. There were new lines around his eyes now, creases I didn't remember being there. Or perhaps I'd simply stopped looking closely enough to notice. Because I no longer have to endure it. The words came out steady, controlled. I'd practiced them in my mind for months, testing different inflections, imagining this exact moment. But nothing could have prepared me for the actual liberation I felt saying them aloud. Our daughter's final exams were over. I was done pretending. I ignored the swirling confusion and shock in Evan's eyes, pushing the divorce agreement across the table toward him. The document made a soft whisper against the polished wood, such a quiet sound for something that would shatter our lives so completely. The company shares in your name, we split them 50-50. Everything else, all other assets, comes to me. Evan's eyes scanned the document, his brow lowering with each line. I watched his jaw tighten, watched the muscles in his neck tense. His fingers, which had once traced loving patterns on my skin, now gripped the papers until they crumpled at the edges. He slammed the papers down with a force that made the teacups rattle in their saucers. Impossible, he roared, his voice ricocheting off the walls. How is that any different from leaving me with nothing? I will not agree to this divorce. He leaned forward, his cologne, the expensive one Zoe had probably bought him, wafting across the table. His voice rose with each word, taking on that same tone he used when berating incompetent employees. And besides, you've been a housewife all these years, haven't touched the business. I was the one out there grinding, closing deals, drinking until I was sick to build this company. What right do you have to half the shares? I didn't get angry. Anger was a luxury I'd exhausted years ago, somewhere between the third and fourth time I'd found hotel receipts in his jacket pockets. Instead, I simply leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. My tone was casual, as if I were discussing the weather or commenting on the neighbor's new car. Fine. Let's take it to court. I let the words hang in the air for a moment, watching comprehension slowly dawn in his eyes like a sunrise he didn't want to see. But I should remind you, I continued, examining my manicured nails with deliberate nonchalance, with the evidence I have, I can easily file for an asset freeze. All our marital property will be locked down, including your shares. And while we're at it, I can also sue Zoe to claw back every penny of our marital funds you spent on her over the years. I paused, savoring the way the color was draining from his face. If I freeze her assets, that will certainly include her shares in the company. I let that sink in, counting silently to 10, watching him work through the implications. The company is about to go public. The shares of the two largest stakeholders frozen simultaneously? I tilted my head, as if considering a fascinating puzzle. You can forget the IPO. The entire company's operations will be paralyzed. Evan's hand, resting on the table, clenched into a tight fist. The veins bulged on his forearm, pulsing with barely contained rage. His knuckles went white. He spoke through gritted teeth, each word forced out like shards of glass. So you planned this. You deliberately chose this exact moment to bring this up. I held his gaze, my expression unreadable. Outside, I could hear children laughing as they rode their bikes past our house. Such innocent sounds, such a stark contrast to the dissolution happening inside these walls. Do you remember what yesterday was? He looked utterly lost, his eyes blank, searching some internal calendar that had apparently never recorded the important dates. I felt a familiar pang, not of pain anymore, but of something closer to pity. How had I ever loved a man who could be so present in business meetings yet so utterly absent from his own life? Yesterday, I prompted, my voice softening despite myself, was the last day of Chloe's final exams. Watching his eyes widen in dawning horror, a bitter laugh escaped my lips. It tasted like old coffee and regret. He'd forgotten. Of course he had. How many important dates had he forgotten over the years? My birthday, spent alone, eating takeout while he worked late. Our anniversary, the 20th one he'd missed because of an emergency client dinner. And now he had forgotten the single most important milestone in his daughter's life. I closed my eyes and let out a long, slow breath. When I opened them again, they were clear, focused, stripped of any remaining illusion. Our daughter has graduated. Divorcing now won't affect her anymore. Under Evan's stunned gaze, I slid the agreement back in front of him, the paper making a soft scraping sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. 50-50 on the shares. You have two options. 1. You transfer the equity to me, which will require a shareholder vote. Or 2. You buy me out. He exploded, his chair scraping backward with a screech. Are you insane? You're taking everything else. Where am I supposed to get the money to buy you out? I shrugged, the gesture deliberate and dismissive. Then give me the shares, or we go to court. Your choice. He was seething, a vein throbbing in his temple like a living thing trying to escape his skin. His face had turned an alarming shade of red, and for a brief moment, I wondered if he might actually have a stroke right there at our dining table. But my face remained a mask of cool indifference. I'd learned well from him, after all. How many times had I watched him negotiate with that same impassive expression? How many times had he come home and bragged about crushing some opponent with his poker face? He finally choked out his decision through clenched teeth. Fine. I'll buy you out. It was just as I'd expected. The IPO was everything to him, his crowning achievement, his legacy, his proof to the world that Evan Montgomery was somebody. If we divorced and I took half the shares, his control over the company he'd built would be threatened. His voting power would be diluted, his authority questioned. After all this work, after all these years of sacrifice, his words, not mine, he would never allow that to happen. He scrawled his name on the signature line with such force that I heard the pen scratch through the paper. Then he threw the document at me before storming toward the door, his footsteps heavy with barely restrained fury. He yanked the door open, his whole body radiating anger. Only to find Chloe standing there. She froze, clearly startled, her hand still raised as if about to knock. Her backpack hung from one shoulder, her face flushed from the summer heat outside. She wore the expression of someone who'd just walked into a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. My heart leaped into my throat, pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My plan had been to finalize the divorce and then gently break the news to her. I had waited until she was out celebrating with her friends to have this confrontation with Evan. I'd choreographed every detail, controlled every variable. I never thought she'd be home so soon. What should I do? How much had she heard? Chloe? I started, stepping toward her, my hand outstretched. But her eyes, red-rimmed and furious, burning with a betrayal so raw it made my chest ache, were fixed on her father. Is it true, Dad? She demanded, her voice trembling with an emotion I'd never heard from her before. She'd always been Daddy's little girl, always defended him when I'd made excuses for his absences. What Mom said, have you been with another woman for the last 10 years? Evan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air on a dock. But no words came out. He just lowered his head in silence, and somehow, that silence was more damning than any confession could have been. Chloe's eyes welled with tears that caught the afternoon light, making them shimmer like broken glass. She bit her lip so hard I worried she'd draw blood, then turned and ran. Her footsteps echoed through the house, followed by the slam of her bedroom door. Chloe! I started after her, but a hand clamped around my wrist, fingers digging into my skin hard enough to leave marks. I spun around to face Evan's furious glare. Sienna, did you have to do this? Did you have to get a divorce and hurt our daughter like this? I stared at him, my own anger flaring white-hot for the first time in this entire conversation. How dare he? How dare he try to turn this around on me? Let's be very clear, Evan. My voice came out low and dangerous, each word precise as a scalpel. You hurt her when you betrayed our marriage. You betrayed this family. Ignoring his stunned expression, I wrenched my arm free with enough force to stumble backward a step, then ran out the door after my daughter. I searched everywhere, her room, the basement where she sometimes went to think, the backyard where we used to stargaze together. Finally, I found her in the small park near our neighborhood, the one with the old oak tree where I'd pushed her on swings when she was small enough to fit in my arms. She was sitting on a bench, staring blankly into the distance. The setting sun painted everything in shades of orange and gold, but the beauty felt cruel, inappropriate for the moment we were living through. I sat down beside her, the metal bench still warm from the day's heat. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. A jogger passed by, their footsteps rhythmic and steady. Somewhere, a dog barked. Life, continuing its normal course, indifferent to our pain. Her voice, when she spoke, was a ragged whisper. Mom, I'm so sorry. Tears streamed down Chloe's face, cutting clean tracks through the makeup she'd probably applied that morning when the world still made sense. Panicked, I pulled her into my arms, stroking her back the way I had when she was small and had nightmares. You have nothing to be sorry for, sweetie. You didn't do anything wrong. She let out a choked sob that shook her entire frame. But you knew. You knew Dad was cheating all this time, and you endured it for 10 years. For me. My hand stilled on her back. A familiar ache spread through my chest, old and new at the same time. She wasn't apologizing for a mistake. She was apologizing for my pain, for existing, for being the reason I'd stayed. And that broke my heart more than anything Evan had done. Oh, honey, I whispered, my own voice thick with unshed tears. It wasn't endurance. It was a choice, a calculated decision that adults have to make. I pulled back slightly so I could see her face, needing her to understand this, to really hear me. I made that choice because I wanted you to grow up happy and healthy in a whole family. I wanted you to have both parents at your school plays, at your science fairs, at your birthday parties. I wanted you to have stability and security while you were figuring out who you wanted to be. Chloe pulled away, her tear-filled eyes locking onto mine. She blinked, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but there was something else there too, understanding, maybe, or the beginning of it. But a person only has so many decades, she said, her voice breaking. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have had to carry the pain of his betrayal alone for 10 years. 10 years, Mom. That's a long time. It was. God, it was such a long time. I sighed softly, my expression softening as I looked at this incredible young woman my daughter had become. When had she grown up? When had she become wise enough to understand things I was still learning myself? I smiled, tucking a stray piece of hair behind her ear, the same gesture I'd been making since she was a toddler, and gently wiping the tears from her face. Who said this family only brought me pain? I said playfully, pinching her cheek. It brought me so much joy over the years. Every single day with you has been a gift, sweetheart. Your first steps, your first words, watching you grow into this amazing person. That wasn't pain. That was privilege. Besides, I added, my smile growing genuine, it's not too late for me. I'm only in my 40s. The best is yet to come. A small laugh escaped Chloe's lips, surprised and watery. She nodded, her expression firming with a determination that reminded me so much of myself at her age. Then I remembered something, and my own face grew serious. I took her hands in mine, needing her to hear this, to really understand. But I didn't ask you. I just went ahead and asked your dad for a divorce. Are you angry with me? Chloe's head snapped up. There were still tears clinging to her lashes like morning dew, but her gaze was resolute, clear, more adult than I'd ever seen it. "Mom, we are all independent individuals. You have the right to pursue your own freedom and happiness. You don't need my permission for that." She squeezed my hands tighter. "And I will always, always support your decisions, just like you've always supported my dreams. When I wanted to do robotics instead of piano, you backed me up. When I wanted to apply to aerospace programs even though everyone said it was too hard for girls, you told me I could do anything. Now it's my turn to back you up." I stared at her, my own eyes filling with hot tears that finally spilled over. In that moment, I knew my daughter was truly grown up. She wasn't the little girl who needed protection anymore. She was a woman who could stand beside me, who could understand the complexity of human choices and the courage it took to change your life. When Chloe and I got back to the house, Evan was still there, sitting in the living room like a ghost haunting his own life. Chloe shot him a cold look, the kind of withering glare only a disappointed daughter can deliver, huffed, and walked straight to her room without a word. I turned to him, my voice flat and businesslike. "Let's go sign the papers tomorrow." Then, ignoring the lost look on his face, the expression of a man who'd just realized he'd bet everything on the wrong hand, I went to join Chloe. That night, we lay in her bed and talked for hours, sharing old memories I'd thought she'd forgotten. We laughed until our sides hurt, remembering the time she'd tried to build a rocket in the backyard and nearly set the garden shed on fire. We cried together over the Christmases her father had missed, the birthdays he'd been too busy to attend. As the night wore on, somewhere between midnight and dawn, we made a decision. It was time for a road trip. The day after the divorce was official, after the lawyers and the signatures and the final, anticlimactic end to 20 years of marriage, Chloe and I left. Ever since she was a little girl, Chloe had dreamed of building rockets. Aerospace was her passion, her calling, the thing that made her eyes light up in a way nothing else did. She was planning to apply to MIT, and I'd promised her we'd visit before she submitted her application. So we started our trip there, touring the campus under clear June skies. I watched her face as she explored the labs, talked to students, ran her hands along the equipment she might someday use. She glowed with possibility, with potential, with the promise of a future that was entirely her own. Then we drove 3,000 miles across the country to a beach town in the south, windows down, radio up, singing off-key to songs we both loved. We stopped at diners and roadside attractions, took photos at landmarks, bought ridiculous souvenirs. We were running towards something instead of away, and the difference felt revolutionary. I was lounging on a beach chair, sipping cold coconut water and watching Chloe play volleyball with some other tourists, her laughter carrying across the sand like music, when my phone started buzzing. It was Evan. Again and again. I ignored it, turning my phone face down and taking another sip of my drink. But he was relentless, calling back to back to back until the constant vibration started to irritate me. Finally, I sighed, put down my drink, and answered. "Sienna, where did you put my blue striped tie?" "A tie?" He was ruining my vacation over a tie? If I wasn't halfway across the country, I would have slapped him. Actually, no, if I wasn't halfway across the country, I wouldn't have answered at all. "You've lived in that house for over a decade and you can't find your own things?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Besides, it's there. You never saw it as your home anyway. Why don't you just hurry up and move out? Move into a home where you can actually find your own ties." I hung up before he could respond. Until the divorce was legally finalized and all the financial transfers were complete, I couldn't completely block him. So I just silenced his calls and muted his messages and tried to forget he existed. It was surprisingly easy. When we finally returned home 3 weeks later, tanned, refreshed, and somehow lighter despite carrying bags full of souvenirs, Evan's pent-up frustration exploded. "Sienna! You're finally back," he yelled, ambushing us the moment we walked through the door. "Look at this place. You just run off without a word, and the house is a disaster. I can't find anything. And my suits, no one's been ironing them. They're all wrinkled. How am I supposed to see clients like this?" He gestured wildly at the living room, which looked exactly as it always had. You're in your 40s. Can't you stop being so selfish and just abandoning your family? I almost laughed. Had he lost his memory? Suffered some kind of head injury? We were divorced. He wasn't my problem anymore. I'd spent 20 years managing his life, and I was done. I was about to tell him exactly that when Chloe's door opened with a bang. You have no right to talk to Mom that way, she shouted, stepping into the hallway with her arms crossed. She's not your maid, and she's definitely not your mother. You're a grown man. Figure it out. Evan turned to her, his expression shifting from anger to wounded confusion. Chloe, honey, I'm just asking your mother. My mother has a name, Chloe interrupted, her voice cold as winter steel. And she doesn't work for you anymore. She hasn't for weeks. Maybe you didn't notice, since you barely noticed her for the last 10 years anyway. I felt a surge of pride watching my daughter stand up to him, but I also knew this wasn't her battle to fight alone. I stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Chloe's shoulder. It's okay, sweetheart. I've got this. Turning to Evan, I kept my voice calm and matter-of-fact. Evan, we're divorced. That means you need to take care of yourself now. I left a list of local dry cleaners on the kitchen counter 3 weeks ago. There are also numbers for house cleaning services, meal prep companies, and personal assistants. I suggest you call one. Or several. But Sienna. No. The word came out firm and final. I'm not doing this anymore. You wanted Zoe for 10 years? Well, congratulations. Now you can have her full time. I'm sure she'll be thrilled to iron your shirts. His face went pale. Zoe and we're not, she's not. Not what? I asked, genuinely curious. Not together? Not living together? Not ready to play house now that your wife isn't handling all the boring domestic details anymore? Evan's mouth worked silently. The truth was written all over his face. Whatever fantasy he'd built with Zoe, it didn't include the mundane reality of actually sharing a life. It was all hotel rooms and romantic dinners, not grocery shopping and laundry and remembering to buy toilet paper. I thought so, I said quietly. Evan, you need to leave. This is my house now. Well, mine and Chloe's. You got your buyout money. Go find your own place. But I have nowhere to. There's a nice hotel downtown, Chloe offered helpfully, pulling out her phone. 4.5 stars on Google. I'll text you the address. I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling. Evan looked between us, seeming to finally understand that something fundamental had shifted. The two women he'd taken for granted for so long weren't the same people anymore. Fine, he muttered, grabbing his jacket. But we'll need to talk about arrangements for seeing Chloe. I'm 18, Dad, Chloe said, her voice softer now but still firm. I'm an adult. If you want to see me, you can call me and ask. Like any other adult would do. She paused, then added, and maybe work on being someone I actually want to spend time with. Evan left without another word, and the house felt immediately bigger, airier, like someone had opened all the windows and let in fresh breeze. Over the next few months, my life transformed in ways I'd never imagined. The first thing I did was redecorate. I'd spent 20 years living in Evan's choices, his preferred colors, his style, his art on the walls. Now, I painted my bedroom a soft sage green I'd always loved. I bought new furniture, hung up photos of places I wanted to visit, filled the house with plants that made me happy. The second thing I did was go back to school. I'd been an economics major in college before dropping out to support Evan's startup dreams. Now, I enrolled in online courses, discovering I still loved the challenge of financial analysis and market theory. The third thing I did was start investing. With the buyout money and my share of our assets, I had capital to work with. I was careful, strategic, doing my research. I invested in women-owned businesses, in sustainable technology, in companies I believed in. I also reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with over the years. Women who'd sent invitations I'd declined because Evan had some work thing. Former colleagues from my brief career who'd tried to keep in touch but eventually gave up. I built a social life that was entirely my own. Chloe got into MIT. The acceptance letter arrived in March, and we both cried happy tears this time. She was going to study aerospace engineering, going to chase her dreams without anyone telling her what she couldn't do. And Evan? I heard through mutual acquaintances that the relationship with Zoe had imploded within 3 months of our divorce. Apparently, the excitement wore off once it wasn't forbidden anymore, once it came with actual responsibilities and compromises. He'd tried to contact both Chloe and me several times, but we'd established clear boundaries. Chloe saw him occasionally, supervised lunches where she'd update him on her life in polite, measured terms. She was kind but distant, treating him more like a colleague than a father. He was trying, I'd give him that, but trust wasn't something you could rebuild with effort alone. It required time, consistency, and genuine change. As for me, I ran into him once at a coffee shop about 6 months after the divorce. He looked tired, older somehow, wearing a wrinkled shirt that made me think he still hadn't figured out the dry cleaning situation. "Sienna," he said, his voice hesitant. You look really good." I did. I'd started taking yoga classes, had finally grown out my hair the way I'd always wanted it, wore clothes that made me feel confident instead of appropriate. "Thank you," I said simply. "I've been thinking," he started, then stopped. "I wonder if there's any chance we could." "No," I said gently but firmly. "Whatever you're about to ask, the answer is no." He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this. "I made a lot of mistakes." "You did." "I'm sorry." "I appreciate that," I said, and I meant it. His apology didn't change anything, didn't erase the past, but it was something. "I hope you figure out what you're looking for, Evan." "I really do." "And you?" he asked. "Have you figured out what you're looking for?" I thought about that for a moment, about my cozy house full of plants and books, about my growing investment portfolio, about the classes I was taking and the friends I was making and the life I was building brick by brick. "I'm not looking for anything," I said finally. "I'm creating it." 1 year later. I stood in the crowd at MIT's Family Weekend, watching Chloe give a presentation on her rocket propulsion project. She was confident, articulate, completely in her element. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, and she caught my eye in the audience, grinning. This was what I'd fought for. This moment right here, my daughter, brilliant and happy and free to become exactly who she was meant to be. After the presentation, we walked through campus together, her arm linked through mine. "Mom, I've been thinking," she said. "After I graduate, I want to start my own aerospace company. Something focused on sustainable space technology." "That sounds incredible," I said, my heart swelling with pride. "I was hoping, maybe you'd want to be involved? You've been taking all those business and finance courses, and I know I'm good at engineering, but I'll need someone I trust to help with the business side." I stopped walking, turning to face her. "Chloe, are you asking me to be your business partner?" She nodded, looking both nervous and excited. "I know it's a lot to ask, and you're probably planning other things, but I can't think of anyone I'd rather work with. You're the smartest, strongest person I know, Mom. You took on Dad and won. You rebuilt your entire life from scratch. If anyone can help me build something amazing, it's you." Tears pricked my eyes, happy tears this time, the kind that came from joy so pure it hurt. "I would be honored," I said, pulling her into a hug. As we stood there on that campus, surrounded by brilliant minds and infinite possibilities, I realized something profound. For 20 years, I'd thought I was sacrificing myself for my family. But I hadn't been sacrificing, I'd been investing. Investing in my daughter, in her future, in the kind of person she'd become. And now, that investment was paying dividends I'd never imagined. The best really was yet to come. 5 years later, I stood in a gleaming conference room, looking out over the city skyline. Behind me, Chen Aerospace Technologies was etched in elegant letters on the glass wall, the name Chloe had insisted on using, honoring my maiden name and the fresh start I'd made. We'd successfully launched our third satellite last month, and investors were lining up. Chloe was the visionary, the brilliant engineer everyone wanted to work with. I was the strategist, the one who'd built our business model and navigated the financial landscape with skills I'd honed in those online courses. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe, meeting with NASA tomorrow confirmed. Also, Marcus wants to know if you're free for dinner Friday? I smiled. Marcus was a kind, brilliant astrophysicist we'd met at a conference. We'd been seeing each other for a few months now, nothing serious yet, just enjoying each other's company. He made me laugh, remembered the small details I mentioned, and never once took me for granted. I was in no rush. I'd learned that the most important relationship I needed to nurture was the one with myself. I texted back, NASA meeting is huge. And yes to Friday. Tell Marcus I'm choosing the restaurant this time. Setting down my phone, I turned back to the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere in this city, Evan was probably sitting in an office, still chasing the next big deal, still trying to fill whatever emptiness had driven him to make the choices he'd made. I didn't hate him anymore. I barely thought about him at all. He was just a chapter in my story, an important one, certainly, one that had taught me invaluable lessons, but still just a chapter. The real story, the one I was most proud of, was the one I was writing now. Every day, every choice, every risk I took was another sentence, another paragraph, another page. And the best part? I was both the author and the protagonist of this story. It was mine, completely and beautifully mine. And I'd never been happier.